Okay, everybody. Welcome back, everyone. I hope you had a chance to sign up for field trips. I don't know that there's any space left, but hopefully you had a chance. Now we're going to hear from a longtime OAS member and past president, David Kaiser, on War Honors Revealed, DStretch analysis of the Deadmond Bison Robe. David Kaiser has documented documented and researched the rock art of the plains and Pacific Northwest for over 20 years. He's a former president of the Oregon Archaeological Society and a current board member of the American Rock Art Research Association, recently winning their Wellman Award for distinguished service in the field of rock art research. He has authored and co-authored more than 30 publications, including monographs, book chapters, and articles in national and regional journals. And longtime friend, too. Welcome, Dave. Go ahead and let's hear your talk.
All right, thank you very much. All right, this evening I'm going to talk about using modern recent technology to analyze a 19th century bison robe. This is a painted Indian robe from Montana that we looked at, and it's got various biographic art scenes painted on it. Plains biographic art, it's a style of narrative illustrations showing different war honors. It's found all across the plains, all the way from southern Canada and Alberta, all the way down to northern Mexico in the Chihuahua area. So there are regional differences, but there's enough repetition of the acts that they show and the way things are stylized and conventionalized that we're able to interpret this art. The types of things that are often shown are the killing and striking of an enemy, capturing weapons or other war trophies, stealing horses, rescuing a comrade, and sometimes even being wounded. That was a minor war honor. In some groups also we see them wounding the enemy as well. And these are the sort of things that are on the robe that we're looking at tonight. There are three primary, I'm going to remove this here in the corner. There are three primary media in which biographic art occurs. The oldest of which is rock art. It evolved out of a more static ceremonial art style, but started appearing around 500 years ago, prior to European contact. Things became more narrative, started showing one group fighting another group, individuals in warfare. And again, this is found all across the plains. The most recent iteration is what's called ledger art, and that is art that was drawn originally in ledger books from forts and early stores, where they would get the account books and draw their war honors in those. And then the third is what we're here tonight to talk about, is robe art. And robe art is kind of a catch-all phrase. It applies to, of course, animal skin robes, but it's also teepee liners, war shirts, that sort of thing, where places that they would document their war honors. Here's examples drawn by Carl Bodmer in the 1830s, both of a Blackfoot robe and also one that was collected. Lewis and Clark collected painted bison robes on their journey west. And we don't know how far back this goes. It could go back as far as the rock art to 500 years, but because they're perishable, we don't have anything much older than a couple hundred years old. And one of these robes is in the Broadwater County Museum in Townsend, Montana. The little dot shows you about where they are. It's typical small town museum. It's got a lot of farming equipment, early pioneer things, stuff from the small town, but it does have this painted bison robe, and it really stands out as something interesting and different in this museum. It's called the Deadmond robe because it was owned by the Deadmond family for around 100 years. And just being something that they had around their house, it was worn, it's stained, and they were actually going to throw it out, take it to the dump and toss it, until someone from the museum noticed what they had and asked them to donate it to the museum, which they did in 1987. After that point, it was cleaned, repaired, still not in great shape, but there's a lot of stuff that can be seen on this robe, and it's garnered a lot of attention. So previously, there's been research done on this robe. The first one was Janice Boma did her master's thesis on the robe, identifying it as Blackfoot art, and analyzing it a little bit later. Our own Jim Kaiser, my co-researcher, worked on this with Boma and was able to do a seriation study to date the robe. They did it to the late 19th century based on comparisons to other dated bison robes. And more recently, Stephen Lysett did a similar study using statistical analysis. And he narrowed it down to, he thinks, around 1890. So we already know that this is a Blackfoot robe. Based on both the style and the content of the art, and we'll talk about that a little bit later, and its approximate age. So as part of the research that Kaiser and Boma did, they did a direct tracing of the robe where they laid it out, put a clear film over the top, and were able to do a direct tracing. And that's what you see here, and this is what was published. Because some of this is very hard to see and very worn, I think they did a great job with the technology that was available. And based on this illustration in the museum today, they have a large reproduction of the robe where they transferred the illustrations that Kaiser and Boma did onto a more recent bison hide. The actual robe is also on display, but again, because it's more difficult to see, they did this recreation. But we still thought there was more that could be seen in this robe. It was worth further study, especially using more recent technology. And so that was the impetus for this project. And so we thought we wanted to use DStretch. And some of you have heard us talk about rock art, might have heard us discuss DStretch before. This is a plugin for ImageJ software, it's an open source medical imaging software developed by the National Institute of Health. But John Harmon took this program and made a plugin for it called decorrelation stretch. That's what DStretch stands for. And by doing this, he doesn't just enhance a color as if you would think, increase the luminance or the hue of an image, but it looks at the different parts of the color spectrum, and it emphasizes where it sees differences in the different colors. So it will make one color next to another and push their differences significantly more. So not increasing what they are, but changing radically how they're represented. So it creates false colors, but it differentiates one color from another when they're nearby each other. And similar technology has been used to enhance Mars rover imagery, things like that. And this was designed specifically for rock art. And this is John Harmon here in the image, participating in an OAS project that we did a few years ago. And so the DStretches that he designed are really designed for the pigments found often in rock art, but they apply to many other things. You just want to show you a few examples of how we've used DStretch in rock art. Here is an image that's relatively hard to see, but through the magic of DStretch, you see the image can just pop right out at you. And here's another example. This is for Picture Gorge here in Oregon. Again, so much easier to see. Sometimes something you can see with the naked eye and you can just see it much better. Other times it brings things out you can't see at all. And just here's a third example, this from Speedus Creek from an OAS project. And all these things just suddenly pop out at you. Although you can see the colors aren't terribly natural in a lot of these, and especially if you look at this, you can see the background, you get these hyper colors, the natural colors. And that's part of the algorithm that they're using. So it creates these false colors, often these crazy neon things. But the key is not the colors that we're seeing, but the information that's being revealed. And as you can see, it's bringing out information you can't see very well with the naked eye, but it still pops right out. And that's how we're able to recognize things that, again, we can't see very well with the naked eye. DStretch is great. It'll work with any digital image that you might have, even a scan of an old photograph taken 50, 60 years ago. It doesn't have to be taken on a special camera or anything like that. You just have to take that image and then run it through the software. The one thing that's very important, though, it does need to be a higher resolution image. If you have a 72 dp photograph and you run it through, chances are it's going to be very muddy and pixelated, just not going to show you very much. So it is key to get as high of a resolution as possible, just to get as much data for the program to work with. And it's also important that the images have to be in color, because the way it works, as I mentioned, it looks at the color spectrum and then emphasizes differences that it sees in the different colors. And because that doesn't really work very well with black and white imagery. And likewise, doesn't really work on petroglyphs. I mentioned using this in rock art. Sometimes petroglyphs do show up using this, and the reason being sometimes the outer patina of the rock is of a different enough color to the undersurface that gets chipped away when they carve a petroglyph that it does sometimes enhance the images, and it can be helpful, but it's not really what it's designed for. It's really designed for different colored pigments. The full program is available at John Harmon's website, DStretch.com. He asks for a $50 donation, but then you get the full program. It's available to anyone, and you can do this. And there's also an app that's available for iPhones as well as Android phones, or your iPad or whatever that might be. But that is not quite the full program. Doesn't have as many full suite of pre-programmed different algorithms to calculate different colors, but it's hugely important when you're working and you're out in the field. Again, using a rock art example, if you have very faded imagery, you're having a hard time seeing it, you take a DStretch photo in the field, if you have it on your phone or another device, you can then suddenly see it and realize, oh, my photographs, I'm cutting off half the image. There could be more to this side. So having something that you don't necessarily have to do in the lab that you can take with you in the field is of great value. So we decided, let's put this to the test. And in 2022, Jim Kaiser and I got a Loring grant from OAS. Thank you very much for making this possible. We headed out to Montana. We're given access to the Robe by the Broadwater Museum. We took the Robe, we very gently laid it out, and we set lighting, and then we took over 500 photographs. And just like in the field, we had an iPad there with a camera. We were able to do DStretches in the museum to make sure that we were getting the information that we wanted. We would know that we needed to get more imagery from different parts of the Robe. I wanted to take a look at DStretch and just kind of see what is it doing and how do we use it here. So this is what the interface looks like once you open Image J and then you open the plugin for DStretch. And it's just going to cycle through and show you all the pre-programmed algorithmic changes, all the different DStretches. And they're labeled down below. You see the different squares being highlighted, LBK, CRGB. And it's not really important what a lot of those mean. I don't even know what a lot of those mean. But you can see that some of them work really well with red, some work really well with yellow, some with green. And it's a matter of going through and finding what is the appropriate DStretch that we would use. And then when you publish these images, you'll always want to include that with any of your photographs. So if anyone wants to recreate what you have found, and if you suddenly say, I'm seeing something that no one has seen before, people think you're making it up. But this always allows you to be able to see what's going on. And we'll take often many DStretches of the same image, just like what you see being cycled through here. And we'll layer them in something like Photoshop or other processing programs. And that way you can record things you can see on one DStretch that you can't see on another. You can pull all the one color off one DStretch, another color from another, and join them together. And on PaintShop Pro or Photoshop, any of those. And there's a couple of ways that we could do that. Sometimes, just like the direct tracing that Bowman and Kaiser did in the early 2000s, you can draw on it with an electronic pen or a cursor and just trace what you're seeing. And the other option we have for some of these, where they show clearly, is you can take your DStretched images, layer them in something like Photoshop, and then you can do a flood fill, the little paint bucket that will fill things in. And here's an example there where it's filling in everything it sees, the computer sees as a certain color. Now, it isn't just a magic button you click and everything happens. You have to manage it. You have to control the tolerance so it's not filling in too little or too much. Often you fill in too much and it starts filling in, the background noise you can see around these images. So you have to really watch it as you go. It's almost like tracing it, but you're using the computer to determine where that pigment is existing. And occasionally, again, you get a false positive where it wants to fill in the background and you have to watch that and change your adjustments. But the flip side of that is sometimes things get lost in the noise, even in DStretch. But I've been doing a flood fill and suddenly things will pop out that I didn't see, but they make total sense. It could be the trigger on a gun or the hammer on a gun or something else entirely, little details that you want to be there, but I didn't see it, but the computer knows it's there. So that's kind of how we would go through every part of this robe, work through the different DStretches, look at the different color palettes, see what is being revealed that we couldn't see before, and then do tracing and put it all back together. And here's a tracing. It's not been color corrected yet, so some of the colors are a little vibrant, but gives an idea of what we were seeing there. Another thing you can do on DStretch is use custom filters. So what we were looking at before were all the pre-programmed, about 24 of them, that have been prearranged when the program was built, thinking this covering the main colors that you're going to come across in natural pigments. Well, sometimes they just don't seem to show, and we think something should be there, but we can't find it. And here's an example. If you look at the top here, there's this warrior with a feathered headdress, but there's a big gap between the heads and this kind of rayed arc above its head. And we thought, well, there's got to be feathers on that because we see it elsewhere on the same robe. You can see these yellow lines connecting for the stems of the feathers of the headdress. So we thought, okay, we're going to try all the DStretches, and we tried everything. And some got a little bit of something, but nothing was really working. And so I thought, okay, let's dig a little deeper into this program and look at what are called custom color spaces. And that boxed out area on the bottom there, you can see there's sliders, and you can just minutely adjust it one way or another until you think you're bringing out what you're trying to bring out. It's a lot of trial and error, but when you're really focusing on one area that you think you have something, that's when you can really get in, work at the minutia of it. And here's what we ended up with. You see the image almost completely disappears and we're losing everything. But if you look here though, we're seeing those rays that we were trying to hunt down and find. And so we would take this image, overlay it with the other ones, and that way we're able to just add that to our tracing. And here's an example of the final image of all the different colors put together. So there's various ways that we can use DStretch that helps us both in being able to see things, being able to record them and trace them and then present them. So as I mentioned, the robe is really worn, it's faded. It was around a family's home for 100 years. This area here is the most worn section, is very bare. It was stored over a chair and people sat on this, scooting around, for maybe the better part of a century. And we were really hoping that DStretch would reveal something in this spot that we just couldn't see. But as much as we took photos of this area, we weren't able to find anything. It had all just been rubbed away by people's backside over the years, unfortunately. But it's certainly worth a try. You never know. It's also in the middle, there's a large purpley stain coming down. Don't know if it's wine or grape juice, whatever it might be. We've heard stories that children in the house used to make a fort with the robe and play with it. So there are various holes in the robe and stains, and some of it is not in good repair. But that makes it more of a challenge to see, what can we find on this robe. Here's the tracing that was done about 20 years ago. And if you look here, there's the green horse there that has no front legs. So that's a key that chances are something got damaged or lost there. So let's take a look at it. And as you can see in the inset photo, there's a lot of damage in this section. Bits are starting to flake away and there's like a big stain. So when we focused on that and we did DStretch, here's the image. And there it is. Not only did we find the front legs of that horse, but we found a whole new teepee we didn't know was there. So it's pretty amazing what it can show, even in a very damaged area. And other little details like the red ears on that green horse. It's pretty amazing that we were very excited when we realized there's a whole new teepee in there that we just didn't see. So it's not always fine details. Sometimes major things, it's just too hard to see with the naked eye and there's too much damage. So another example, I mentioned the big purple stain down the middle. Well, up near the top there's a bit of a gap there. You see a teepee with a single horse. And that's in this generally stained area in poor repair. So again, focusing our DStretches there. There's another photo of the image, and there's the DStretch of it. You can see there and there, found two more horses, a second one by the teepee, and another one down below who has a rider. Here's a tracing of that using multiple DStretches to put it together. So again, we have much more information that we're able to find some of these major things using DStretch. Similarly, if you look down below here, there's a weapons tally. And weapon tallies were often done to show captured weapons from the enemy. It could be over a career of warfare and show what they've taken from the enemy. Well, this had a couple guns to one side, had a big gap, and then it had some things that looked like they're quivers, but it seemed really unusual to have that gap. Didn't make a lot of sense. So we focused our attention on that. That's the area we're looking at. Here's a DStretch, and right in the middle, there are three bows, at least two of which are recurved as part of that tally. So, it made a lot more sense now to be a complete lineup of stolen weapons. And here's an example of what we originally had, and then with the added bows and some other color added to this image. So you can see it does take a lot of time looking at the robe, trying to see what areas should be inspected closely and really focus the attention. But we photographed the entire robe and have gone through all the more than 500 photos trying to find information we didn't have previously. I just want to take a look at additional captured weapon tallies that occur on this robe. As I said, it was a very common thing to do this tally of a lifetime's career of capturing weapons. And this is a particularly popular amongst the Blackfoot. They really love to show weapon tallies. And if you look at the top here, beautiful tally. It's got a bow, it's got a quiver, it's got three long guns, has a spear with feathers hanging from it, another lance with either feathers or some sort of filial on it. It's also got a powder horn below. The image below that, again, we were able to add a lot of data to this. We have two rather simple looking rifles or long guns, a couple quivers, and a shot pouch. The shot pouch and the quiver all have these X designs in it. And most of that was not seen previously and came out in the DStretch tracings that we were doing. And then to the left, another tally. Here we have a spear with feathers hanging from it. We have a pipe bag and a quiver. And the pipe bag is particularly interesting as the leader of a war party was known as the pipe carrier. And to capture the pipe from the leader of the enemy was quite a coup, literally and figuratively. But I want to take a look at those shapes next to those three objects we just talked about. See kind of blobby shapes with lines on them right here, here, and here. And those are capture hands. Those are floating hands representing the warrior taking those things. And that's something we see a lot in biographic art, in warrior art, where they don't always show the entire action in a full narrative, but it becomes abbreviated. In this case, you don't even see what would be the hero of the scene, the protagonist, but he's represented just by his hand. And the same thing is be represented even when you don't see the hand. It's just implying that these are things that I have done. We have other examples of capture hands found elsewhere on the robe. Here's a couple horse stealing scenes. You can see the picket rope hanging from the horse with the capture hand down below. And on one of the horses, you see two people riding it, which is a common way to show the rescuing of a comrade from the thick of battle. So that's a 2-for-1 coup over there. Here's another couple wonderful scenes on the robe. I'm going to direct your attention first to the upper left. We have this warrior with an amazing horned headdress. It's got feathers or eagle down up at the top. It's got ermine hanging from the sides. He's holding a horse, again, by either the rein or the picket rope, showing a stolen horse. He's doing battle. He has bow and arrow. His enemy has a gun. The enemy is falling down in a defeated posture, and we can follow his footprints to see the path of the action. So after the battle, he goes to the enemy and he steals the gun, which you see floating out of his hand. And here's a close-up of it. If you see that little trident shape on the gun, that's another way to show a capture hand. And it's specifically a Blackfoot way to depict a capture hand, is in this trident form. It's also another way we can see that different artists have created different parts of this robe because they're depicting the same thing in different ways. And then looking at the scene on the right, we have a warrior on horseback. He's firing his gun at the upper figure. And then we have another figure on the ground laying down behind a tree, also with a gun. Well, again, if we follow the footsteps, it's leading us into the action, telling us what is going on. Can we look closer? There's another capture hand. So he's shot the enemy, and you can see the red coming out of the enemy's head. There's the blood from the wound. He goes up and he's capturing that weapon. Again, we see floating from the hand of the enemy. So again, a lot of these are details that we hadn't seen before, things like this capture hand and the wound, which tells a lot of the story. These are all things that we found using DStretch. So returning to this image that we looked at before with the character on the far upper right there with the headdress, I want to look at this scene more fully. If you look in the lower left, you see these orangish horses, and you see a person, again, with the same headdress right there. And this is a common depiction we see often in biographic art, where the hero of a scene or an action in a scene is shown more than once, and is showing things from different times and different places. So down below, you have this warrior, very distinctive, upright bonnet with all these feathers, and he's got a medicine bundle hanging from it, which is an animal skin with sacred medicine objects inside, helping him in battle. But you can see the animal's legs and tail hanging behind him, and he's stealing a gun from the enemy. But the same warrior is the one depicted that we were talking about earlier in the upper right. The headdress is the same. The medicine bundle is there. It's not quite as clearly depicted, or at least what remains is not quite as clearly depicted, but there's still distinctly 4 legs hanging down. So it's clearly the same person being shown at different times doing different deeds of bravery. Similarly, if you follow the footsteps through the action from that upper figure, he's clearly defeated the lower figure, and then those objects next to him, if we look here and here, again, not in great repair or detail, but we have capture hands. He's captured both the headdress and the quiver from the enemy after defeating him. In addition to these 2 scenes that this warrior is depicting in fine detail, it also includes a weapon tally above, and we have more capture hands showing the capture of a spear, 2 bows, 2 axes, one of which has a decorated flag on it. So again, all these details, and we're able to get more and more of this and tell more and more of the story. And that's really the key is, yes, it's great to be able to see it with more clarity and appreciate the artistry involved and recognize more what things are, but it's all about what story is it telling? How can we read this? Because that's what biographic art was meant for. It was a public declaration of one's bravery and one's deeds. And They were designed to be read both by the friends and the enemy. So everyone knows, what a good warrior that you've been. This act of showing the same figure more than once in a scene is known as a cyclical narrative. So it depicts the same subject multiple times from different times and places, as I mentioned. If you look to the left here, we see this figure on the yellow horse with the big red shield. Same figure is seen down below in pedestrian combat, again with the same big shield. So different events, different war honors being made by the same person. On the right, it's a little less clear, but this is coming from one of the weapon tallies. There's this long series of footprints connecting each of these riders. So it appears to be showing this rider at different times has probably been stealing these horses and is connecting from one action to another. Rather than the footsteps leading through space, it also leads through time, showing things that it has done at different points of this warrior's career. Again, one thing that was really surprising that we were able to see with DStretch that we weren't able to see well with the naked eye are these wounds. And we saw one of the other person who was bleeding from the head. Well, we have more examples here. Again, the warrior with the red shield. If you look at the enemy, you see the red blood coming from the head of his foe. To the right, we have another battle scene. And you see the blood coming from the shoulder of the falling enemy. Below that one, we have a weapons tally, but amongst this tally, we have this figure also, which appears to have a bloody wound. And finally, in this combat scene, we see a wounded horse. You see the red blood on that green horse. So these are all things that DStretch really helped us with. And here's an example. This is a natural photo of what this image looks like. You can see how some of it's very faded and difficult to see, but you can still see what's there. But when we DStretch it, it pops up much more. And we can really see the difference between the brown and the red of the blood coming out of this figure's head. And that's the key. Those things often blend together as things fade, and DStretch can really help bring those things out. Again, I mentioned animal bundles. We have a couple other examples of animal bundles seen on this robe. The one on top is the one we talked about before, but right below that, we have this yellow figure, again, hanging from a headdress, what appears to be another animal bundle with other decorations, tassels, or feathers applied to it. Similarly, there's a bundle being carried by the figure on the left. Not only is it an animal bundle, but by the different colors, it either has feathers or other decorations tied to its legs or its tail, and we find that very common. Horse stealing was one of the key honors in the latter period of warrior art, and we see lots of examples of that here. The most explicit we see is there on top, where you see a teepee with a picket pin and the line leading right to the horse, some kneeling down and cutting that rope to steal that horse. Now, you would picket your prize horse, your best horse, right outside your teepee because it would be protecting it. You wouldn't put it in the back 40 out to graze at night because the enemy would come and take it. So it shows particular bravery for a warrior to come into camp when you're sleeping inside and cutting that horse and stealing it. It's quite an honor. And if we look right below that image, again, you see this tally of war honors, and it all is leading either to or from just that picket pin. Again, that picket pin is standing in for a stolen horse. And in not on this robe, but in some other art, it becomes iconographic, and it'll either be a single line or an X indicating a stolen horse. So here we don't see the action at all, but we do see the picket pin telling us what's going on. Similarly, the image on the left where we have the teepee and the now two horses, originally we only knew there was one, is the same example of picketing your prize horse right outside the teepee. And again, the act is only implied. We don't see anyone cutting a rope or footsteps coming and going. But this was, again, a shorthand way to symbolize that I went to the enemy's camp and took the horses right outside their teepee. Some people have wondered about those dots. We wondered about them. There's various stains that they don't appear to be indigenous, don't appear to mean anything. I think they're just, again, whether that's grape juice or some other odd thing that got on there. So just in case you were wondering. Other examples of horse stealing, I mentioned the warrior with the elaborate horned headdress. Again, you can just be shown holding on to that picket rope, or as we mentioned again, just the hand hanging onto it. And then finally, and this is a little less clear, but it does seem to be the case in most of these, when you just have an isolated horse. They weren't generally putting a horse there just to fill an empty space or having it be iconographic. It's really to show a tally, just like a weapons tally, that those floating weapons out there, that this is another stolen horse. And I also just wanted to point out, we weren't looking at it earlier, but that yellow horse in this image, it again is showing in a different color. It's got a saddle, so does the other one with the two people riding on it. So there's just lots of beautiful details in this robe. There we go. So I wanted to take a look at how we know that this is Blackfoot art. And there are some defining characteristics, some of which I've kind of talked about, but one of which is the style of horses that's here. Jim Kaiser and others have done statistical analysis and measurements of looking at different types of horses, comparing Blackfoot horses to Crow horses, and really looking at the angle of the neck and the head. And you're able to determine, rather than just stylistically saying, oh, that looks like a Blackfoot horse, you can statistically say that falls well within the category of what we would classify as horses created by that culture group. The thing to tie on the halter is actually what it's called by the Blackfoot. And that's that crossbeam you see hanging from the halter with the 4 feathers to it each end. It is only found amongst the Blackfoot. Once you see that, you know for sure that we're dealing with Blackfoot art. Again, triangular bodies, sometimes shown as wine glass bodies with only one leg, is again a very common defining characteristic of Blackfoot art. And then, as I mentioned, the trident capture hand. And there are other elements we see on this robe that are found in other culture groups, but are most frequently found amongst the Blackfoot. And one of those is landscape features, such as that tree. We have examples in other Blackfoot art, but that would support the identification here. And again, I mentioned weapon tallies. They're most commonly found amongst the Blackfoot. So again, we're able to add a lot more data to this robe and confirm the previous identification of the creators of the robe. So I feel like this has been a very successful project. We're still processing a little bit of the data and getting some of the final colors and confirming our work. But you can see the original tracing on the left and what we came up with on the right, adding significant more details and colors, and both big and small changes to it. So we determined it was probably the creation of 8 or 9 different Blackfoot artists based on individual stylistic differences, all falling within the greater Blackfoot stylistic tradition. And so significant things that we found new horses, teepee, weapons, capture hands, wounds, all of these sort of things, as well as many other small details that I mentioned, whether it's just small elaborations of a headdress, of a weapon, of recognizing the pathway of footprints that are telling the story. And again, that's really the key, is the narrative is what's being told. And this is revealing the stories that these artists wanted told, that look at my acts of bravery and look what I've done. And there's a syntax and a vocabulary to this that we're learning, and makes us much more easy to read when we have all the details. So this kind of project, again, I think has taught us a lot, but it also shows that we can use DStretch and other more recent technologies beyond just what they were designed for, beyond just rock art. Clearly can use it for robe art, but it can be used for all sorts of different things. You could use it on painted sculptures in medieval Europe. It used to be brightly painted. They were all cleaned off. Most of them no longer are, but there's going to be remnants of that pigment in the pores of those rocks. And you could use this sort of technology to study it, to bring it back. And so really it's all sorts of ways that this could be used. And hopefully this is the first of many of such projects. So that's most of it. I did want to give again a very special thanks to the OAS for the Loring grant. We really appreciate it. We couldn't have done the work without you. Also wanted to thank the Broadwater County Historical Society and Museum to allow us to work with the Robe. My co-author and co-researcher, Jim Kaiser, who's been dealing with this Robe for 20 years and knows it better than anyone. Cam Dimmick, who helped a lot organizing several of our 500 photos, David Minnick for photographs, and also just want to give a special shout out to my wife, Susan Case. She's not able to be here tonight, but tonight is our wedding anniversary. She let me come and give this talk anyhow, so thank you. And I'm more than happy to answer any questions you might have.
Microphone out to anybody. Looks like we have some questions. All right.
I have a question, David.
Yes.
Can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Where was this DStretch work done? Was it at the museum?
No, it wasn't. It was, here, I'll bring this here. We did some work at the museum, like I said. We had an iPad with a camera, and we would do that so we to make sure that we got all the data that we needed for this. But most of the work done where we're cycling through everything in great detail and looking at every individual photo, that was all done back here in Oregon, in our lab, in our rock art labs that OAS does on the weekends. You're all welcome, come help. But it really had to just kind of go through every individual thing, see what we could see, what we needed to do new DStretches for. But so most of it was all shot at the museum. We used it at the museum, but most of the work was done here in Oregon.
Thank you.
Sure.
All right, I got a question right here.
So when you said you had 8 or 9 possible artists, are those 8 or 9 different characters that are being shown, or are they telling a story about one person?
That's a good question. No, they are showing different people doing different things. And some of those, so I don't think it's one event. It's a collage, really. And we think it's probably a series of younger artists who don't necessarily have 50 years worth of war honors to show. A great warrior could fill this robe up easily. And it's not a single event. It isn't like a landscape where all this is happening simultaneously. These are a series of events from a number of artists, and we can recognize some of them. We could say it's the guy with the red shield, or it's the guy with the tall bonnet and the bundle. There's some characters we can identify, especially when they're shown more than once. So we realize that, you know, there's a couple scenes by this person, a couple by the other, some tallies. But some of it is just artistic, stylistic differences, the way some people would draw a capture hand versus another, or the way some would draw a hooked hoof on a horse and others would draw a more realistic hoof. And some of this changes over time, but also it varies by individual, kind of what styles that they inherited and how they depicted things. So that's how we determined that it was 8 or 9 different warriors showing their collected events all on the same robe. And we've seen some other robes that have done similar things from around the same time period. And sometimes when they were done for sale to Euro-Americans, they would even box out and say, here's one scene, here's another scene, almost like a comic strip, and just showing, so dividing it up. So it didn't look like one big thing. In this case, they didn't do that. It's just we can tell stylistically and through the content what it is.
Another question here.
Yeah, under the long stain, there was a circular feature that had some radii coming off of it. What was that?
Here, I'll bring it up so we can talk about it. Sorry, just shrinking stuff down here. Just take me a second to bring it up. Yes, it's something I thought about discussing, but I didn't, but I'm happy to do so. There we go. Okay, hopefully you can see it there. So, yeah, so that area is one of the more difficult things to pull out in DStretch. I worked really hard trying to get more detail out of it. But so it's a circular encampment, and those are teepees inside. It's a teepee encampment surrounded by an enemy, and you see those are all human figures around the outside of it. So it is. The action's not terribly clearly depicted. There aren't any weapons that we can see, but the thing that makes sense is that's a fortified village site of some kind, surrounded by the enemy. But it isn't entirely clear, who the victor is. But for this sort of art, you generally show your successes. You don't brag about your failures. So it was probably some of the war party attacking an enemy village, is what you're seeing here.
All right, one more, another question over here.
Have the Blackfeet been able to sort of identify who they think this might have been depicting, like maybe what family or what local tribe or grouping that this belonged to, that it might be depicting events that they know about because of their storytelling?
Not that I know of, unless Jim, unless you know anything different to that.
No, no, good question, Kathy. This is almost certainly Pagan, the southern tribe of the Blackfeet in Montana, but because it's 100 years old, and these were made for sale. Right in that period, they made lots of them for sale. Unfortunately, this guy that bought it, Mr. Deadmond, he bought it at a trading post, almost certainly, probably Fort Benton or somewhere around there. If he would have written it down, they knew who sold it. The trader would have known, and we'd be able to trace that back. But when that gets lost, and these sort of scenes, there were hundreds of these produced in the 19 teens. The Great Northern Railroad hired dozens and dozens and dozens of Blackfeet men to paint muslins to hang in the Great Northern Hotel in Glacier Park, and in Waterton in the Prince of Wales Hotel. And they recorded who did it. And we've actually looked at these scenes thinking, well, gee, maybe we can recognize Big Moon's war honors, or maybe we can recognize somebody else's, but they're so generic that, you can look at these and they're just a whole bunch of guys look just the same. So unfortunately, it gets lost in time, and there's just no way to tell. I've looked at again hundreds of these robes, and they just all kind of blur together.
But there are many robes out there where we do know who created it and whose war honors they're showing. But for this particular one, yes, we just don't know.
Thanks. I had almost the same question, but I guess just following up, what kind of feedback have you had from the Blackfoot tribe? Are they enthusiastic about this kind of technology and research? Or
I haven't talked to them about this robe, but a number of years ago, Jim has something, but let me quick pop in that we did work with the tribe on the reservation, recording some rock art, showing them DStretch, and they were very interested in it and very curious about it. So, but go ahead, Jim.
Yeah, DStretch made a big hit with Wade Running Crane. He thought it was the coolest thing he'd ever seen. But I sent this robe, the write-up I did to James Dempsey, who is Hugh Dempsey's son, who's a Blackfoot guy. He's a blood guy from Canada who wrote about these robes, the reservation period biographic art. And I sent him this. He missed it. He did his PhD dissertation at Oklahoma on these robes. And I sent him this, and I said, nice letter, big long letter. And I said, here's another one. You might be interested. Crickets. Nothing back from him. I asked Jack Brink, I said, is he a real jerk? Well, no, Jack said he's a nice guy. So I don't know. The letter got lost in the mail or got shuffled off to Buffalo. I don't know. But I've got nothing. When we publish this, and we're going to do the whole schmear. I'm going to send it to John Murray, who's the typo for the Blackfeet. And John's a good guy, and I suspect that it will get a little bit better reception there. They're not antagonistic to it, but basically, I think they just got bigger fish to fry.
Any more questions here in the crowd? Oh, hey.
I was just curious about the pigments that were used.
Yeah, I don't know the pigments, but I'm guessing that they're largely commercial pigments based on their colors. There are a lot of very unnatural colors that we don't see on older robes and in rock art, things like that. So, and again, it was probably done for sale. So, they would just take what was available and use, again, commercial paints and things like that, which is one reason it probably is also so faded. It seems like natural pigments tend to last much longer than artificial ones.
I'm curious a little bit more about when you said that they would be for sale. Does that mean that people would have just sort of mass produced these? Or how do you know that this is truly authentically illustrating somebody's personal accomplishments?
Yeah, good question.
Want to bring him the mic since he wants to take this?
During that period of time, sort of the 1880s and 1890s, Indians, of course, were restricted to reservations, and the buffalo went away, and life was bad. The 1886 winter, half the Blackfeet starved to death. And their only recourse to economic things were trading posts. So, and at the same time, people were coming out from the East Coast to Montana and North Dakota and South Dakota. And the Fort Marion prisoners the Cheyennes were taken to Fort Marion, Florida. And these were wild Indians, killed people. And so they were given papers and pencils and told to draw. And art collectors on the East Coast bought these things and traded them, and there was a big market for the original Indian art. So traders out on the plains got involved in this, and they recognized Indian people could make a living essentially writing their histories on paper and on bison robes, and these things had great value. I mean, give an Indian $5 for a robe like this, that was more money than he could make in the whole rest of the year. And the traders recognized this, so they would give a guy $5 in trade, flour and sugar and coffee, and he would paint a robe like this, and then they'd sell it for $25 to a middleman who would then send it back for a carriage robe in Connecticut. Okay, very, very common way to do things. Yeah, there were guys that were sent out to the blood reservation to collect robes like this. And one guy collected 6 of them and sent them back east to museums. So museums got involved in this trade. Well, you have to understand the system of this. It was against the cultural mores to make these stories up, because if you made them up, people would call you a liar. And this was your whole status among your tribal peers. This was why you were a man, why you were a respected chief, why you were a respected person in your tribe. So, and there's all kinds of literature about it. If you made a fake here, you got called a liar, and that was worse than anything. So we know the stories are real. That they were depauperized and reduced to selling their history, their personal histories, for $5, for $10. But the railroad actually did this and had them paint these muslins to put in the hotels to attract tourism out to Glacier Park and Waterton Park. So this is just a little tiny piece of that we luckily found. It didn't go to the dump in Townsend, Montana, but there's probably 40 or 50 of these robes that are floating around in the museums, and they're still sold sometimes in auction houses. So they're not fakes. This one was branded a fake when it was first found. It was a picture of it was sent to John Ewers, who is a preeminent ethnologist in the Smithsonian. but it was a bad picture. It was a Polaroid picture, and yours was told that it was all painted brown, and most of it looks brown. If you remember those pictures, you can't see any of those faded red and green and yellow colors. And you were said, oh, it's probably a fake, because he thought it was all painted brown, done with a colored pencil, and it sort of got reported that it was fake, and so that's the way it was when it was shown. I was told about it. It's probably a fake, and I went and looked at it and I said, no way, it's a fake, because first of all, the thing to tie on the halter, that's a giveaway. Nobody knew about that till I wrote about it in 1996. So I knew it wasn't a fake right then. And then you see all those little capture hands and all those little tiny details. So we know it's real. And the guys who painted it could not have painted fake stuff, or they would have been called out by their buddies. And the fact that we've got 8 or 9 artists, we've got another robe that's called the robe of the five pagan chiefs. And it was Edmund Morris collected it in Canada, specifically went to 5 pagan chiefs and said, will you paint your war honors on a robe? And it looks very similar to this you can see this is Running Rabbit's war honors. This is Leans Over Butchering's war honors. So it's very similar to this. So it's pretty obviously real, and it's a hell of a find, quite frankly.
Thank you, Jim.
All right.
I'm just curious, as you're doing this, how you may have experimented with like angle for the light or color of the light that you're using.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
We weren't able to control the color of the light very much, but we were trying to get an even cast, try not to get shadows, because very often there's a lot of wrinkles because it's so old, and the wrinkles are permanent now in the flesh. So if you get that with a side angle, and then you photograph it, it looks like a drawn line. So really we wanted to get as nice, even, flat lighting as we could. We had several light stands shooting up from above, trying to cast it that way. And we tried various things to see what worked best. And that's, again, why we could look at it in the field. We could use the DStretch in the field and say, oh, this is what's reading. Let's stick with that, or we need to adjust our lighting a little bit.
I'm new to this concept of the robes, and so I was a little curious about the terminology. The word robe,
Right.
was this really a garment? Like I see some holes at the edges. That I'm like, was that
Right,
or something? Was
when they stretched out the robe and they were preparing it, they staked it to the ground, and they would clean it and tan it. And so that's where those holes come from. You can see a little bit of the tail on the right-hand side there. But yes, there were robes. There was that picture. See if I can quick find it here. Oh, I guessed right. You can see where you could wrap it around yourself and display your honors to everyone. And just in this pagan image, even though it's from the 1830s, if you look at some of the details on there, some of it looks remarkably like the robe we just looked at. Look at those capture hands. They look very kind of bulbous and similar. You see weapon tallies, all sorts of things that, again, have echoes in what we just saw.
All right. I don't see any more questions here. I don't know if anybody's asking questions on Zoom. All right.
Okay. Well, thank you very much. Really appreciate it.
Thank you so much. You can actually go and celebrate your anniversary now.
Yes. Thank you.
And I want to thank everybody for showing up today and online and here in person. And it's been great. Our next meeting is not until September. And so, oh yeah. Thank you, Cindy, for bringing refreshments. It's nice to have those back. So that's just for us at OMSI though. So,
Take that.
but have a good night, everybody, and see you back here first Tuesday of September.